Pilots and controllers safely moving air traffic.
Welcome back, everyone. Checking your programs, you'll see our next session deals with the interaction between pilots and ATC. It's a great topic because none of us in this room working in a vacuum. We are surrounded by teammates every day. But no collaboration is more important than the teamwork between controllers on the ground and flight crews in the air. Recognizing this, ALPA and NATCA, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, have built a strong working relationship over the years. President Moak was a panelist at NATCA's Communicating for Safety conference in Las Vegas earlier this year, and we are pleased to have NATCA's National Safety Chairman on this panel. Our moderator is First Officer Marc Henegar, who chairs ALPA's Air Traffic Services Group. Marc?
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate it. Welcome. I'm glad everybody's joining us this morning. The goal of this panel today was kind of a situation where we interact with air traffic controllers every day, all the time, and quite often we interact with them more than we do with anyone else, more than our flight attendants, more than our dispatchers, sadly more times sometimes than our families. You know, we have the same relationship with air traffic control often than we have with the other pilot in a flight deck. And so we have this intimate relationship, but we don't always see what goes on the other end of the microphone. We don't always understand completely what they're going through. And so what we'd like to do today is share some information with you about some of the things you've heard in the media, get the real story behind it, talk about how air traffic controllers are hired, trained, how they're assigned to facilities, kind of what training they go through. And then beyond that, we'd also like to present you with a few operational scenarios and kind of discuss how those are reacted to by air traffic controllers in the system. With me today is Tim Arel, the Deputy Vice President for Safety and Technical Training from the FAA's Air Traffic Organization. Next to him is Dale Wright, the Safety and Technology Director for the National Air Traffic Controllers Association. Next to him is Tom Adcock, who is the National Training Lead for NATCA, the Air Traffic Controllers Union. And at the end of the panel, with no forethought, is Bill Coyne, Dr. Bill Coyne of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, the Program Coordinator for their Air Traffic Management Program. So what we're going to start with is a brief presentation that Tim will lead us through, and we're not going to go through the presentation line by line. Our goal is to basically use each slide as a basis for discussion and have Q&A as part of that. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have some additional time for question and answers from folks in the audience for anything that you'd like to get information from these fine gentlemen. So with that, Tim, if you'd like to Marc, give it a shot.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. As you know, the FAA has been going through some significant changes within the air traffic organization with regard to implementing a safety culture. There's been a lot in the news. I hope to cover a lot of events. Oops, I think we are a few slides off here. Pardon me. If we could go back to the beginning of the presentation.
Abort.
But thanks to our collaboration with NATCA, the controllers involved in NATCA, the great professionals that have stood up there, and folks throughout our management ranks, we've been implementing a series of safety tools, voluntary safety reporting, and a risk analysis process that we'll go through, and it's yielding unprecedented amounts of data. We hope to cover a lot of that information. Some of the biggest changes you'll see up on the slide, and we can speak to each of them, but we went from local reporting, or 500 plus air traffic facilities basically determining what to report, to a national level review of our safety events, and supported by voluntary safety reporting from our controllers and frontline managers. We went from local electronic monitoring, or the issues that were being identified by controllers or managers themselves and what they chose to report, to a nationwide electronic detection system that's yielding a lot of data similar to what you are experiencing with your FOQA data. And then instead of having that analysis done at the local level, or that prioritization of that risk at the local level, we've really enjoyed basically a standardized risk analysis process that's providing consistent data with input from controllers and pilots anytime that we review what we consider to be a risk analysis event, and we'll get into that here in a little bit on the definition of that. The big thing, or the big change, is what we do with that information. As you may be familiar, our old culture was that we would, if a controller had the unfortunate experience of losing separation 3 times within a year, there could be some adverse impacts from that. We also used to do very standardized training no matter what the event was. Didn't matter what contributed to it. If a radar controller made a mistake, we put them through some very basic radar training. Same thing for tower. It was kind of like the penance that they had to do, complete as fast as possible and get back to work. Now we actually identify where the risk is, what the contributing factors were, and oftentimes, in my experience leading investigations for the last couple of years, very rarely is it just a controller performance issue. Sorry, I'm losing my place on the slide, but I guess I want to get into the conversation point here. I won't read bullet for bullet on the slides, but with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
It looks like the FAA and ATC are, about where we were as pilots 10 or 15 years ago. We were, FOQA programs were showing up on properties, ASAP programs were showing up on properties, and we went from being sort of an anecdotal, this happened to, John kind of conversation, to a data-driven approach for both training and operational guidance, for mitigation, for issues, those kind of things. So they're kind of at the forefront. The ATSAT program is, we're going to talk about it here in a moment. The ATSAT program has been running for a year or two here now, and it's been phased in at different facilities. So they're about where we were 10 or 15 years ago, and they're going through that fundamental sea change of both culture and reporting, and then how they look at things. So with that, you can go to the next slide if you like.
Oh, you can pull that up.
Or just see us, which that's actually better.
Let me just, okay. So the big thing for us is being able to work with the data that we have. For the previous 3 years prior to the implementation of our voluntary safety reporting program, we were aware of 5,000 safety events, roughly 1,800 to 2,200 a year, depending on the year. And we thought we were doing a pretty good job with the system. Since the implementation of voluntary safety reporting, we've received 63,000 reports. The big thing that we're proud of is at least 64% of our personnel, or of the eligible personnel, are submitting reports, so we're getting data, and we're averaging 300 to 350 reports per week. So there is no shortage of data associated with our safety events. And it provides a unique perspective for everybody that was in the tower cab that day or in the radar room. We don't just collect that data and sit on it. Our major accomplishment, or our major initiative as a result of that data, is to collect it, identify where we have problems that everyone in the field has identified, or try to coalesce that information, and then issue corrective action requests. So at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that we've implemented 170 corrective action requests. That's us either writing to terminal, en route, procedures. It may be a resource issue, it may be a technology issue. But the big thing is to get that information out for the folks with the resources or the expertise to be focused on fixing that problem, and then reporting back to the ERCs on how we're doing in addressing the issue.
Yeah, it's from an ASAP perspective, they're averaging about 15,000 reports a year or so. By contrast, pilots are averaging about 50,000 ASAP reports a year. And the ASAP program is basically just like our ASAP program. You file a report when you see something, and it's reviewed by an event review committee. It goes through the process. It helps to drive training and operational changes from a positive perspective. But the one thing I would point out is the ASAP program is fairly new to FAA, and they are much more diligent about filing than we are. I mean, there's only 13, 14,000 controllers, and they're filing 15,000, reports a year, and we have, 100,000 airline pilots in the U.S., and we're filing 50,000. So if it's a competition, we're losing on that. But the idea is, the more you say something, the more we can do about it. Because I can tell you, whenever I show up in a meeting with FAA or stakeholders, and I say, hey, there is a problem with this, whatever this is, the first thing I'm asked, where is the data? Share with me some data. And when I bring, de-identified ASAP material to a meeting like that, it carries so much more weight. It's not just one person representative at a meeting saying something, it is a whole group, a group voice. So I encourage you, if you see something, say something.
The increase in reporting, and some of you have probably seen articles throughout the newspapers in the country or online, folks continue to be amazed or I guess shocked that we have a significant increase in the numbers of losses of separation, pilot deviations, whatever the safety event may be. And I'll take a quick note here just to say, when an event occurs right now in the safety world, we don't say that it was a controller's, well, they use the old term, an operational error. It's not a loss attributed to a controller. It's not a pilot deviation. Something happened. It's a safety event. And not unlike anything else, from a police or fire call to an aircraft emergency, what we thought was the original issue or problem oftentimes is not actually what happened. So again, standardized review of every risk analysis event that we identify. Our QA office, which has NACA representatives embedded with us, reviews that information and makes a determination or validation of what actually occurred. Very rarely do the folks at the local level remember exactly everything that occurred or view that data in a neutral way. So that's an important thing I want to stress, is that when we review these events, we don't classify what they are until we've gathered all of the data that's available to us. So if you look out of the 130 million operations over the last year, or for the time period of April 2012 to March 2013, we identified 206,000 potential safety events. Could be a loss attributed to a pilot, a controller, an unexplained issue, but there was a detection or a manual report of something not being right in a potential loss of separation for whatever reason. Out of that, only 5,918, which is a really high number if you think about it, for us anyway, since we only used to report 1,800 a year, but we're saying about 6,000 now we're averaging 6,000 losses of separation a year, again, for whatever the reason. We then, out of those losses of separation, if there is 70% or less of our required separation, we call that a risk analysis event, where we've lost 30% of our required separation. We then have our collaborative groups review that information in a risk analysis process. And what they do is take that information and put it in contrast, or they evaluate it and conduct an analysis for what was the severity of the event against what's the likelihood of repeatability. And that's how they rate something on whether it's a high risk or not, low risk, et cetera. So out of those roughly 1,800 risk analysis events that we do a more in-depth research on, only 37 actually end up being high-risk events. They were considered extremely significant and a high degree of repeatability. And then those are the events that we target, or those types of events or issues, whatever may be identified out of them, that's where we aim all of our resources within the ATO, is to mitigate those high-risk events. When you look at all those numbers and you look at the percentage of losses of separation in contrast to the volume of operations, it's still a pretty darn safe system.
And so from our point of view, if you look at the number there, the 5,918 losses of separation, on an annualized basis, this is about 3 times the amount that were recorded the previous year in 2011. We had about 1,800 in 2011. We see a lot in the media reported about this. On top of this, we hear that there's an increase in pilot deviations, which always gets the pilot's attention. So, what's the real story here? What is happening? The traffic analysis reporting program, so there's 2 ways to report something in the FAA when you're a controller. You have a mandatory occurrence report, which is a kind of a written or a computer-generated report by the controller themselves, just like we have our company reports when we have a TCAS event to go around, or any one of that list of 40 or 50 things you see in your flight operations manual that you're supposed to report to the company. That's what a mandatory occurrence report is to a controller. An electronic occurrence report is, or it's sometimes called by its rather unfortunate nickname, the snitch machine, is the traffic analysis reporting program. That started in January of 2012. It was put into effect by an order. And what's also called TARP, what it does is it analyzes each radar hit from a radar antenna compares it to every other radar target that's within range of that antenna, and is always monitoring for losses of separation. So you get a lot more losses of separation that way, because a lot of times it'll detect a loss the controller didn't even know about. You know, it went from 3 to 2.97, or, you know, instead of 1,000 feet, it was 800 feet, or whatever the deal was. So it's always looking at these. And, you know, the theory is that the errors were always there, whether it's a controller or a pilot error. It's just the tree falls in the forest analogy. If there was nobody there to see the error or record the error, it didn't happen. So now our reporting and our recording systems and our processing systems are so much better that we're getting a much better visibility on the system and its operation as a whole. And so that's kind of why you're seeing this much larger rise in the media. So of course the media tends to sensationalize certain things, but it'll be interesting to see over the next few years, because the assumption is you see the initial rise to reflect the new reporting systems, and then as those risks are identified and mitigated and trained and operationally moved out of the system, you should see those go down. And we've already seen that with the pilot deviations. The pilot deviations went up from about 200 a year to 300 to 400, I'm sorry, 200 a month to about 300 to 400 a month once the TARP program was instituted. And then we've seen over the last several months that number has been floating down, and now that number's 300, give or take, a little above, a little less. And we're hoping obviously that number continues to go down. If there's a TARP event, what happens? Well, if there was a loss of separation, if it's a pilot-generated event, if there's a loss of separation associated with that, it goes for processing. There's a 3-person panel that looks at it. One is an airline pilot. It's not an ALPA representative, but it's an experienced airline pilot. There's a NATCA rep and a FAA rep on that panel, and they sort of determine, they try to get inside the head of the pilot, figure out what was going on, and then try to identify the risk and then further mitigate it. And quite often that is processed as a pilot deviation down line. Not always, but usually processed as a pilot deviation. On the ATC side, I think Tim covered it pretty well. If there was a loss of separation that would be considered significant, then they convene an SMS panel on it and move through that process, trying to find the reason it happened and to identify it and make sure it doesn't happen again. So my question for one thing I wanted to point out is everyone on this panel was an air traffic controller at one point. I started out life as an air traffic controller before I decided that it was a good idea to take pilot lessons and went over to the dark side. Dale's a retired controller. I mean, there's a lot of controlling experience up here, so you're not just talking to folks that might be in management who've never worked a scope, never worked traffic. So all of us have worked traffic to some extent. And my question to Dale and to Tom is, does the TARP program affect how air traffic controllers work at all? I mean, has it made any changes in how they look at things?
It has made a lot of changes to where, you know, when you're running a busy arrival push, rather than try to run everything right at minimum, you have to really pay more attention to the compression you have on a final. I think as people get more comfortable with it, as they are, you'll see that that backing off will disappear and they'll go back to minimum spacing. But when it first came out, a lot of people ran an extra half mile just to make sure.
Mm-hmm. Builds in a little more spacing to cover yourself, so to speak.
That's right, yeah. And the center controllers, they've had their, if you want to call it snitch or whatever, they've had it for years. So for somebody working their terminal facility, it was a big change.
Mm-hmm. Do you still ask pilots to quote unquote call the tower if there's been an incident? And from your point of view, how do these phone calls go now most of the time?
Well, I haven't told anybody to do that in 6 years, but I think if you now with all the data we have, you're able to give them more of a background on what happened. Maybe you get their number, then you research it, use the data you have, and that way you can give them a complete picture other than just trying to get their input and then say, okay, we'll call you back if we need you. You can give a lot better scenario of what happened, a lot better historical information that led to the incident.
Tom?
I think Dale hit it on the head. That's essentially we get we still have the phone calls that go out where we're asked to have the pilots call the facility, but most of the times, honestly, unless it's a controller in charge, the facility management at the center handles those phone calls.
And one thing I'd like to add to that is, I remember being both a controller and a supervisor, taking those phone calls from pilots and just saying, well, don't let it happen again. and who knows where that pilot was on the learning scale, who knows if I had an opportunity to mitigate a risk, or what have the other supervisors seen on the other shifts or the controllers. And those were data points that were being missed. We had a safety event, whatever the cause may have been. We had the pilot call a facility, and it used to just end there. And now, with our proactive safety reporting culture, we're capturing all of those data points. And again, people are seeing an increase in the number of reports. However, those events, like you said, that tree was falling in the forest all along and no one knew it. And we're putting those pieces together. And later in the slide, we'll talk about how we've taken our voluntary safety reporting, and through a program called CISP, Confidential Information Sharing Program, we're lining that up with ASAP data. So we have unprecedented 360-degree view. We have the technology, what the technology captured both in the cockpit as well as through our radar systems and other detection systems. We have the perspective of the controller and the perspective of the pilot, all going into basically a big basket for all kinds of safety engineers and safety professionals to dissect and figure out where do we need to put the resources, how can we mitigate these risks. And it's just, again, it's an unprecedented level of information. We actually were surprised how much, we knew our numbers would go up. We did not expect them to go up the way they did.
Well, and also from a pilot perspective, what does that mean, to us? I mean, I've been on both ends. As a controller, I have told pilots to call the tower, and as a pilot, I admit it, I've been told to call the tower in no uncertain terms. And I will tell you that if you sort of talk to most controllers, from their view, a call to the tower is generally an education. What happened, what's up, how can we learn from this kind of thing. It's not most controllers have no desire to file a pilot deviation. They're just like us. A, that's paperwork, and nobody likes paperwork. B, they like everybody, they don't want to cause problems either. So usually it's just an educational issue, and a lot of times at facilities, it ended there. But now, with the data reporting that's going on, there's quite often, you might be asked to call the tower because of an event, and you call the tower and you have whatever chat you choose to have with them. Remember a couple of things. One is everything is recorded. Almost everything is recorded that you say on the phone. On top of that, the facility now has little or zero latitude. I would emphasize zero latitude on whether a pilot deviation is filed, and quite often they won't even know a pilot deviation is filed. They don't know there was necessarily a lack of separation as a result of that. They have no idea, and so they have no control because these electronic occurrence reports are sent to a service area, hundreds, thousands of miles away. It's processed there, and the controller may never know that there was a loss of separation on that. So my encouragement to you, file an ASAP. If you even have a thought of, I wonder if I should file an ASAP, you should already be typing. Never. I mean, an ASAP does you absolutely no damage. It can only help you, and it can only help the system you're living in. So I encourage you, see something, say something, always file an ASAP.
This next slide just shows you the type of equipment that we're using. I won't go in depth, but TARP has been described. That's our radar detection equipment. CEDAR, because we implemented CEDAR at the same time that we implemented a lot of our risk analysis culture, people thought that CEDAR was this magic system that was reporting pilots. All it is a safety database. It's facility logs. The radar replays get attached to it, voice, etc. Dollar is our digital audio recorders, and that is, in the past, we've had to have facilities make that recording and send it up to us. In some cases, we can tap into those recorders remotely now, in some test cases, and we're within a year of being able to access all of our major facilities automatically, so that when a radar loss of separation occurs, that radar file is automatically imported into the log, into that CEDAR database for our safety professionals to look at, and at the same time, it'll retrieve the associated audio file. So it'll be an instantaneous, if we had an event occur this morning, Marc would be able to pull that up on his iPad right now. We're about within a year of that technology being operational. The last couple of CISP I've already covered, and then operational error detection program, that is the old snitch machine in the center environment, the en route environment. They used to worry about that alarm would go off in the operation, and the one thing I would go back and ask Tom and Dale about is the change in the en route environment, which is ongoing now because we just turned TARP on there and we're pulling OEDP out. And in the terminal world, our intent, and I think we've gotten a little bit further, is So what if the alarm goes off? So what if you went from 3 miles to 2.99 miles? Keep working the traffic. It's not like, well, 5 years ago where loss of separation, pull the controller off the boards, interview them, sending them off to training.
Walk of shame.
Keep working that traffic. You had a 2.99 mile event. We're not perfect. You can't tell me that you're perfect at 3 miles and then 2.99 is evil. So concentrate on working the aircraft, keeping a safe operation going. The safety professionals will look at it, and right now, if it's a 2.99, a 2.8 on final, they're never going to hear about it. It's not an issue. It's acceptable. It's an acceptable level of risk. We start getting down to 2 mile separation. Well, now we've got a problem. Or 1.5, and then that's when our safety folks, our risk analysis panel, will actually look at those events and identify if we've got some systemic trends that we really need to address.
I think that's accurate. I mean, many times now, the controllers working the sector are not even going to be aware that they had an incident.
Yeah.
It's just, you continue working the traffic. If it comes to you later, then we go through the whole process of filing the ATSAP reports and trying to collect the data and do what we can to get all the information and share that information and improve the safety in the NAS.
Right. Yeah, their ATSAP is like our ASAP. They have 24 hours from notification of the event, not from the event itself.
Correct.
The time you were made aware of the event, or should have reasonably been aware of the event, to file. So.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, encouraging the pilots to file if you think, that's the same thing we do. If you think you might have had an incident, just go ahead and file the ATSAP report.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what we do with this risk analysis data, or when we do these risk analysis panel, we gather that information on an annual basis. And where are we seeing the greatest risk in the system? What's happening with the most frequency, but also what are those 37 high-risk events? What are the common themes that occur? And both last year and this year, because we're 2 years deep into the program, we've identified what we call the top 5 hazards. And those hazards are what we convene a national SMS panel for, to come up with corrective action plans to successfully mitigate those hazards. We've just had the mitigations in place for FY 2012 in place for about a year. We're starting to look at their effectiveness and see if the data is going to start coming down, and then we're actively working the ones for 2013. I won't go item through item, but there's a couple of them that you're feeling out in the system. One of them being a 30-degree turn on for, turns to final. It has to do with making sure you're not at the same altitude, or we're ensuring a 30-degree turn to intercept the final, provide you the best opportunity for a stable approach and less blunder. This year, one of the things that we're really concentrating on is recovery. Some of you may be aware, but air traffic does not, or has not in the past, really trained for how to handle something once it goes wrong. When we went through our academy days or went through our simulation days, if a controller made a mistake, the first thing the instructor routinely did was stop the problem. I don't think that you guys experienced that in your simulator. If your engine goes out, they don't just say, okay, pause it and figure out what you're going to do. But that's how we used to train ATC in the past. We would say, okay, stop it, back it up. Okay, this time make sure you issue that turn or that descent clearance in a timely fashion. And one of the things, mainly through our collaborative efforts with NACA and training and on the safety side, is time after time, not only does the controller's actions after they've lost separation not really solve the problem, they've actually led to they've actually increased the risk and then gotten a third aircraft involved or made the current situation they're trying to resolve worse. So one of our big initiatives through either simulation, discussions, training, procedures, is really put controllers in a situation where, okay, you've lost separation, now what do you do? And it's unprecedented for us, where it's old hat for you all.
I was excited to see recovery on the list. In fact, when I first saw it, I had to ask what they meant. And once they meant, it's like, that is terrific, because you put a controller in a situation, an unplanned go around into another airplane, whatever it might be, and the controller's under stress. It's a very fluid situation. The airplane may or may not be doing what you tell it to, so you have to change your plan quite a bit. And we used to have at the facility I was at, it was called down the toilet. When somebody asked you how you doing, or how was your time today, and you'd say, well, all you saw was my fingernails over the edge of the toilet as I was going down it, and that was, and it was what made, or how people assessed what kind of a controller they were, was it's not how everything works when you're just running everything normally. It's when you're down the toilet, how do you crawl out, dust yourself off, how do you fix the situation, how do you move on? And I think this recovery training is awesome because it'd be like us, having them explain a V1 cut to us, but you don't actually get any training. And then it happens for real one day and it's like, they told me it would sort of be like that. Oops, I'm already in the trees, that's not good. So I think it's a terrific way to go. And a lot of these issues, ALPA participated in the go-around safety risk management panel in 2012 as part of the top 5. And we've worked on a couple of other ones, clearance compliance for altitude. So ALPA's been heavily involved. We're usually, when they talk about this is not something they just talk about internally. They invite us, other folks to the table, and we have a very candid and frank conversation over several days about what's happening from the pilot side, what's happening from the air traffic controller side, and how can we make the system safer? How can we fix this intelligently and move forward? So I'm excited to see some of these things on there for 2013. And the question I would have is, what is the status of the mitigations for the ones we see there for 2013?
2013, so based on the update that I read yesterday, we've paneled at least 2 of the issues. Our goal is to implement 80% of the mitigations that are identified associated with these events. So each issue or each category of risk may have anywhere from 1 to 4 or 5 mitigations that are going to reduce it. Right now, obviously, you may have heard we've had some funding issues this year.
No, I hadn't heard any of that.
So right around the time that we normally would have been convening most of those panels, we were sending controllers back to their facilities because they were going to be augmenting staffing as we gave folks extra time on the golf course.
Nice.
So we experienced a bit of a setback. We're ramping back up, but unlike, or not unlike anything else, it takes a while to ramp back up. So we're not where we want to be, but we know by September 30th we'll have about 80% of the agreed upon mitigations implemented. It looks like we'll make it.
Nice choice of dates. Tom, how are these things trained? I mean, mitigations are great, but they have to be trained and implemented at the facility level. As the training lead for NATCA, how do you see that working?
Well, 2 of the 3 for the 2013 we're working on right now, recovery, traffic advisories, and safety alerts, are being included in the recurrent training. We started that working collaboratively with the agency in 2011 on recurrent training, and a couple of the top 5 issues from 2012 are in there. This year, recovery and traffic advisories and safety alerts are in there. So we're going to start in August of this year rolling out web-based training for recovery and traffic advisories and safety alerts. Then we'll follow that up in January with a instructor-led training, and then we'll go into the simulators in early 2013 and have the opportunity for everybody to practice that. And in addition to some of the other issues listed there, like the recovery issue, that's actually being rolled into the national training order that we have. So like Tim was talking about, we're going to have in several different stages of training throughout the controllers' developmental phases, they'll be receiving recovery training in those phases of training as well.
It's interesting to note that, as pilots, we have recurrent training every year. As air traffic controllers, recurrent training is something almost brand new. For what we would think of as recurrent training, it's only been in operation for a couple of years, and then sadly, as a result of sequestration, it has been sequestered right out of existence for the moment.
Yes.
In the way it existed the first couple of years, yes, it's been reduced, and mainly it's the instructor-led training that's been mostly impacted. The efforts continue.
Right.
We're developing the training. We're certainly we're meeting with our NACA counterparts and developing the information. However, the key is maintaining that cadre of instructors and how do they deliver that information to so many service delivery points, right, consistently, and that's just something we're having a hard time getting around given our budget constraints. But we are exploring methods. We're looking at long-distance learning. We're trying to learn from universities, and we're having ongoing discussions for what some viable options are. We haven't yet identified the most feasible option, but that again has to do with us trying to read the tea leaves on 2014's fiscal year budget.
Also, it's important that you use the training for new procedures, not just to go back over basic air traffic control, but if you have a new procedure, something that's totally different, use simulation for that. So that's another way that we can use the simulation to train the controllers.
Yeah, distance learning, we haven't heard any of that, have we? Bill, when you see these top 5 mitigations at someplace like Embry-Riddle or some of the college training initiative programs, does that affect your curriculum as far as what you're teaching your students there to be prepared to be air traffic controllers?
Yeah, I think it does. Just looking at the 2013 one, and we've taught some of these things, included in our curriculum, but I know recently we're concentrating like on the traffic advisory, safety alerts, similar sounding call signs, conflicting procedures. We put them in situations. So this helps me as a representative of the collegiate program to adjust our curriculum, to maybe cover areas that may be more in depth. Maybe we just touched on them before. Above and beyond the air traffic basics that we're in partnership with the FAA to make sure that we cover. So yes, we do cover several of these, and I can see where I'll be making some more changes to the curriculum.
Great. Tim, next.
I mentioned earlier the CIS program, the Confidential Information Sharing Program. That's just one of the many partnerships that we're enjoying right now as we try to bring all of this safety data together. The other air navigation service providers around the world are all shifting their focus towards a safety culture. You have our friends from Nav Canada in the audience, and certainly their interest in safety is incredible. So as we work in these organizations you may have heard of, CANSO, the Eurocontrol, Safety Focus, ICAO, we're trying to make sure that as we go forward, we're not keeping any secrets. This isn't about technology. This is really about safety, and we care about safety of all of our whether they be foreign operators, us operating with our boundary systems. We expect that we're providing the same level of service to you no matter where you fly across the world. So we're really enjoying the sharing of that safety data, and it's really again, I can't stress the importance of getting the views from not only our air traffic controllers but the cockpit.
Mm-hmm. There's in the confidential information sharing program that we're talking about now, there are 13 airlines currently participating. I know Alaska just became a participant here just in the last few months. And what it allows for is it allows for comparison of an ASAP report and an ATSAP report on the same event. It is incredibly valuable because it's a sort of an augment to the conversation that a lot of times I would have as an ALPA volunteer. You call the facility, you talk to the NATCA rep, or you talk to the controller, and then you talk to the pilot. You sort of get to both sides of it, and you kind of work it out and act as mediator, and try to find the common ground here and find a solution. But that's exactly what this is. It's data driven, and it allows us to compare a lot of issues. And that's another reason why I ask you to file an ASAP, because it's very possible that someone filed an ATSAP on it, not to go out and get anybody, but just as an opportunity to make the system better. And every time we can compare an ATSAP to an ASAP, it just makes the system that much better. Because as we know, it's like I've talked, and many of you I'm sure have talked to pilots after an incident, and they're a lot of times highly emotional, and they're very slanted in their view, and the same thing is happening on the controller side, and you sort of look at that from both sides, and you sort of realize kind of, okay, here's what really kind of happened, and you can attack it from that method and offer information and sensitive conversation to both sides. It requires a lot of discretion, it requires a lot of trust, but it's a great opportunity and program. I want to take this moment to talk about what ALPA does for outreach to air traffic control. And I'd like Blake Kane and Matt Price to come up for just a moment if they're in the room to chat about their program. So what ALPA does, we outreach via the education committee to various college programs on the pilot side. I know I go to the University of Alaska at Anchorage usually once or twice a year, and I basically do a group lecture for both the ATC students and the pilot students. We have a lot of other organizational benefits like that where we go talk to colleges either on an ad hoc basis. We also have airport safety liaisons who go out and have relationships with local airports and air traffic control facilities on both the management side and the NATCA side. So we're there, and we've got relationships in a lot of places, and this ultimately really benefits the line pilot because it gets us more information, it gets us on the inside, it helps the controller and the facility out because they get to know what the pilots are thinking about, because maybe they don't realize what they're asking the pilots to do is maybe not reasonable or something like that. So, I guess those microphones aren't turned on. Oh, famous guys. Great. Matt Price and Blake Kane are two new Air Traffic Services Group volunteers. They're from ASA ExpressJet. And what they have been doing is great. And they did that, ironically, I'd love to take credit for it, but they did it before they came to the Air Traffic Services Group. They did it as regular pilot volunteers. And if you just take just a moment and share with the folks what you've been doing.
Blake and I have been to a few of our major facilities in the nation. Primarily what we do is we go in and we, to say it short, run them through a FAM ride. But we run them through a FAM ride with almost every possible scenario that you could have out there. Everything from emergency descents. We're very big on fuel savings, especially it's amazing to see them realize when you can save even as little as $100 per aircraft of fuel. The face of controllers, they're kind of like, okay, that's nice, but then you sit there and you run the math with them, extrapolating out what that does for companies over the year, and it really gets them motivated to perform their job with a lot more efficiency and everything like that. But the biggest thing for us that I think we've realized is going to these facilities, we've all heard that air traffic control has had a lot of hiring lately. What I didn't realize was that of this hiring, we've got people straight out of the academy going to our facilities like Memphis Center, Chicago TRACON, Potomac TRACON. And these people, back in the old days, I guess they would be around the airport, they would see, they would be a part of flying, they would start at a smaller facility, then move their way up. When we walk into a room and ask how many people have been in the cockpit of an airplane, whether it's as small as a Cessna or a 757, out of 30 people, we usually have 1 or 2 people raise their hand. So it's very important for us, we feel, to be out there running them through what's going on in our cockpits, letting them understand what a runway change creates for us when we check on it with approach and they change it, and how much talking we're doing, why we might be missing radio calls. We've found very big value to what we've done due to the nature of the hiring that's been going on out there.
Yeah, Matt pretty much stole the show there. I don't have much to add to it. It's been eye-opening for everybody between us, between the controllers. Again, with the amount of new hires out there, it's a good experience for both sides of the microphone, and we're hoping to expand upon it. We've only done 3 facilities, 2 centers and 1 TRACON over the last, 2 years? So we haven't done one. Yeah, and it's been a while, so we'd like to get back on the road with our show, but a lot of that's financially driven. So
thank you guys, appreciate it.
Improve upon that.
Thanks. I will tell you that I've been to most of the facilities they've been to as well, and when you tell them that you know Blake and Matt, it's like you're a rock star. They go, because these guys, once they walk in there, they have a conversation with them. They spend usually 4 or 5 days giving briefings to every controller as they cycle through, and the information they give is great. They gave a great presentation at the NATCA Communicating for Safety conference here a few months ago, which is NATCA's equivalent of our Air Safety Forum, and it was loved. I've seen their work. I've been to several facilities and done essentially the same thing. And the controllers, to a person, are incredibly appreciative of this because they just don't get, I can remember when I was a controller, anytime a pilot came up in the facility, peppered with questions. I want to know, I want to know, I want to know. And that would be another encouragement I would make to you. We're going to talk about the air traffic control jump seat program here in just a second, but it's very important anytime you can go to a facility, anytime you can encourage one of your crew members to go to a facility, that is very much appreciated by the air traffic controllers, and it's an incredible learning experience for us as pilots. Because, we know how it works. The way you learn is you walk a mile in the other person's shoes, and suddenly it makes more sense. I can still remember the first jump seat ride I took on Continental in an MD-80 from LA to Cleveland, of all places, in the late 80s. And I was excited. I had never even taken a flying lesson yet at that point. And so I'm off, and they were great. The crew was wonderful. They took me under their wing. They showed me all this cool stuff. We even did an auto landing in Cleveland, which scared the hell out of me. And all this cool stuff. And I remember there was at least 2 or 3 things that were takeaways from that trip where I go, Oh man, now I know how stupid that sounds. I am never asking for that again. You know, I learned do not tell a jet to square their turn to final. That's really not going to happen. But I didn't know that until I got in the flight deck. As I'm sure you're aware, air traffic controllers were routinely allowed in the flight deck up until September 11th. And then as a result of September 11th, they were sort of took a break for about a decade. And a sad break. And just recently, and the point is we've got all this new blood, all these new folks coming through who've never seen an airplane. That's why Blake and Matt's program is so terrific. And so moving forward, you know, we have controllers who are getting in the jump seat. And my understanding is there's been a little less than an average of 100 a month ATC rides in the flight deck since the program started May of 2012. And I guess my question to you is, from your point of view, how has this been working, and what kind of feedback have you gotten from your controllers?
The program's been going really well. However, due to staffing and, you know, because they go on duty time, so there's been some places where the controllers haven't been able to get the duty time to go. And there's our controllers who don't like to fly, so, you know, but not everybody's going to go.
That's ironic and sad.
You can't make them go. I mean, if it was up to me being a pilot, I'm a general aviation pilot, you know, it'd be nice if all of them went, but, you know, you can't make people do. Just like you can't make every captain come to a TRACON like we wish you could. So, but it's going really well. And I remember when I took FAM trips, I always learned on every one of them. Yep. And I've never heard a controller come back that didn't have some kind of a, you know, I didn't know that, or that was surprising to me. And we would like to have more participation. Hopefully it will go up, just like ATSAP. When ATSAP started, it started off slow. And once it gained a little momentum, other controllers came back. You know, I filed an ATSAP report and it was addressed. I got that, then more did it. And we're hoping the FAM trip program does the same thing, that as people talk about their positive experiences, then they'll, more of them do it.
From the training aspect, it's really important to get the developmentals that have come in between 2002 and now, to get them in the cockpit. I mean, they need to see it from that perspective. They don't really have a clear understanding of what's going on until they have that opportunity to participate in that environment. So we're really encouraging them to participate. Like you said, we're having just under 1,500 a year so far. We're trying to do things we can to improve the participation, reducing the amount of time it takes to get approved to file the request for doing a flight deck training through an automated request. But yeah, it's very important that we get that participation, especially from those people who have never had the opportunity to be in the cockpit.
Well, it's a terrific opportunity, and it should be pointed out, I mean, I was in San Diego several months back, and there was a controller who I was having trouble getting on a flight, and he had a couple hours to kill, and for whatever dumb reason, I was at the airport 2 hours before showtime. I don't know how that happened. And so I took him down to my flight deck and, spent an hour and a half, showing him everything about the airplane, showing him the flight deck, everything else, running through runway changes, everything I could think of. And he was just, whoa.
I didn't touch anything.
That wasn't me.
Stop that. You're a controller, you should know better than to hit buttons. No, wait a minute, that's mine. That's my job. But yeah, so I shared everything I could with them. And so I would encourage you, anytime you see a controller there, spend some time with them. It's great for them, it's great for us. And then finally, I was talking to Joseph Teixeira yesterday, and he was talking about, how do pilots outreach to controllers? And I want to point out that Ben Strutton of our Air Traffic Services Group is about to marry a controller. So we take our outreach here very, very seriously. So we'll do whatever it takes, and thanks for stepping up, Ben. We appreciate that. Moving forward, I wanted to talk about, from an operational perspective, kind of what happens when we make certain requests of air traffic control, and kind of what their thinking is, and kind of how we can be better at making some of these requests. And so I'm just going to run through a couple of quick operational scenarios and how we can operate better. The ubiquitous go direct. Take me through your thought process when you get that kind of request. What affects whether it's improved? Is the go direct only good for your sector? Is it good all the way down line? Kind of how that goes. And are we betting on the moving down line? Are we kind of going to be clear all the way down line, or and I realize it's fluid, but how do we make a good request, and how can we help ATC on that?
Well, if it's on departure, I'll speak to the terminal part of it, and I'll let Tom speak to the en route part. Most as you depart most terminals, especially if you're in a high-performance aircraft, jet, or turboprop, by MOU, I'm required to put you at a certain point to leave my airspace into Tom's airspace. So if I have to follow the MOU, or I have to call Tom. So naturally, if I'm busy during a push, enables the thing. But late at night, or in between pushes, you call me, then I'm going to call Tom, and then Tom will take it from there. That's what he does.
I mean, the same thing applies in the en route environment. I have requirements where I have to deliver an aircraft from Miami Center to Jacksonville Center in a very small area. My sector is about 40 to 45 miles wide at the point where I hand off northbound to Jacksonville Center. So I have very little leeway in what I can give you as far as a direct routing. It's basically between 4 and 6 degrees is about all I have as far as play there because of where I have to deliver the aircraft to them. So that's a lot of what I'm looking at when you ask that question. Can I deliver the aircraft to the adjacent sector next to me where I'm required to deliver it? And then the secondary factor is when I put it in the machine, is it causing a conflict further down the road? So I'm looking at that as well. But those are just some of the things that go into looking when you have that direct request. And traffic is, of course, always the other thing that plays into that as well.
In theory, as we move forward with performance-based navigation and sort of this more, not free flight of course, but something more of a direct nature, our flight planning will become more direct, hopefully. That's how we look at it in the West. I realize in the East that's not what happens. But in theory it should become more direct, so we should be less required to ask for those. But when we do, it sounds like the less busy the facility is, and make an intelligent request. If you're if you're climbing out of LA Center out of 15,000 feet, it's unlikely, you're going to get clear direct Johnstown. It's unlikely, but there's nothing wrong with asking, but always try to keep in the back of your mind the same way that you don't want air traffic controllers to bother you when you're incredibly busy at a high workload phase of flight. Remember, a lot of times, if they're struggling to get words in, probably the last thing they want to hear is, hey, can I go direct, blah, blah, blah. So the next one, altitude changes. Whether it's what we called waft off in ATC world, wrong altitude for directional flight, or just a general altitude change, what's the thought process there? What affects whether it's improved? And when we get expedite climb requests, kind of what's the thinking there? Because sometimes we'll get a time to climb or a vertical speed that's required or something like that. Can you kind of give us a little bit of an overview on that?
Well, the expedited climb usually for traffic, so they're usually it's for crossing traffic, and so they're looking at where the traffic's crossing at, and so time, that's when you're going to be at that fix, and they estimate the other plane there, so they use time there. Rate of climb or descent's used on how far you have to go to get there, and so and then as you
is there a tool that they're using for that, or is it more just sort of a eyeball test?
It's more, it's most of it's through experience.
So it's an art form, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, I have the ability to run it, to run out the leader lines on it. I can actually gauge how far, how many minutes I have. So that may be how I extrapolate that rate of climb request. That I have, 2 to 3 minutes before I'm going to have where I need to really be concerned about it. So if you're looking for the altitude change, I'm going to look at it from that way. May go that way with it in the request for the rate of climb.
From a weather request, I mean, we, especially here in the East, there's always thunderstorms, there's always something going on in the atmosphere. What's the general philosophy of ATC when it comes to weather conveyance to pilots? What tools you have on position, what are you seeing versus what we're seeing in the flight deck? And then sort of what, do you want to hear us call up and say, hey, it's Alaska, 120, we'd like 20 degrees right for weather in 10 miles? Or do you just want to hear, we need a weather deviation and give me something, or how do you want that to go?
Well, you want to go with the en route side first?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we would prefer you to tell us what you would like to do. It doesn't guarantee that I'm going to be able to do it, but traffic permitting, if I'm able to accomplish what you're asking me to do, I'm always going to do that. It's just a matter of, usually it's traffic. I mean, it's one of those situations where, like I was explaining, we have very narrow sectors in Miami Center, especially in the departure and arrival quarters. So there's, depending on where the weather is during a particular weather day, we may be running actually inbounds in the outbound gate. So we may have to narrow the outbound gate a little bit, and normally where you'd be able to go, I can't approve that deviation. I've got to force you in a different direction. But yeah, we would always prefer to have you tell us, we'd like to deviate 20 degrees right for weather.
In the terminal environment, my weather display is a lot different than what he has in the center. He has warp. I'm getting mine right off the radar. Mine's as a sweep hits it.
Right.
Warp builds it. So the displays are completely different from the
So it's
terminal.
important to point out that, so if you're working in a terminal environment most times, the radar depiction you get is a result of the primary radar sweep of the antenna. There's not necessarily, not always a special weather overlay from NEXRAD or something. A lot of times you're seeing the precipitation generated by a return to the radar antenna, whereas in the center environment, you're actually seeing a kind of a NEXRAD weather or a weather return that you might see when we do our pre-flight planning. So the tools they have available to them are sometimes better than what we have and sometimes worse. I mean,
Right.
I can recall it when I worked radar, there was times when the radar would show Amtrak going by. That's not terribly helpful necessarily, unless you're really low. So from a clearance compliance point of view, if you think, this happens a lot where we're left high on an arrival and now we got to dive to make the altitude restrictions, or we're told to the ubiquitous slow down, on that big descent, on that idle path descent. If we think we're going to have a clearance compliance issue, do you want to know right away, even though we're just not sure we might not, or would you rather wait until we're 5 miles from the fix or 10 miles from the fix and we know we're going to have a problem?
Well, every controller thinks the same, but I would rather, as soon as you know it, I'd like to know it.
Yes.
Because if you wait 5 miles or 5 miles from the fix and can't make it, I might already had something planned at that fix.
So you're not worried about the nuisance call about, hey, I might have a problem, and then you make a new plan and I ultimately don't have a problem. You just rather hear it as soon as possible up front.
Right. Like I told you yesterday, the only nuisance call I did not like was on downwind, what's my number? So.
So we'll switch gears here a little bit. We're about 10 minutes away from Q&A, I think. Talk about ATC hiring and training a little bit. So where do potential air traffic controllers come from? The military, do they come from college training programs, off the street? What's the max hiring age? What's the max age to work traffic? I know when I came to the FAA, a small percentage came from the military. A few came from maybe another air traffic control program like a federal contact tower program, and everybody else came off the street. Virtually no one came from college, and the average age in the class was probably late 20s, because the max age to enter the academy, as I recall, was 30 or 31. 31. And I was 22, I think, when I entered. I entered 3 weeks out of college, and I was the youngest person in my class by quite a bit. And now you go look at some of these academy classes, and 22 might be among the older folks in the class. I've seen folks checked out at Las Vegas that are not even old enough to drink yet, which maybe that's a good thing in Las Vegas. But the youngness, the youth of the folks entering the agency is quite different. So can you talk about kind of just real briefly about where they come from?
Well, I'll first off, you have to, unless you have some kind of special waiver due to retirement, which there's very few of those left, you're mandatory retired at the month you turn 56. At the end of that month, you're mandatory retirement. A lot of people say that's forced out. I say you've completed your term, but
So you can work live traffic until you're 56?
Yeah, like I still have 3 months eligibility left. I don't think I'm gonna use it, but I could still work 3 more months. But that's what the cutoff is now. The training, since Tom's the training rep, I'll let him talk about the training for him.
I mean, the vast majority of the people that are coming into the agency now are coming through the CTI program.
Which is the College Training Initiative.
College Training Initiative.
Okay.
And I guess second would be military, and then the least individuals we get are from the general public hiring. So, they're basically the people when we go through those selection panels, they're in their early 20s. Most of the people that are being hired nowadays, because they're fresh out of.
And they go through a testing process, an interview process.
They go through the ATSAT testing. Then they have an interview process. They have to go through several clearances, medical clearance, security clearances that they've got to clear, and then they're usually offered a position at a specific facility right now.
It's interesting, when I go to the NACA Communicating for Safety, I can't tell you how many pilots come up to me and say, hey, I was sitting right seat at Horizon or whatever this thing, and I got an opportunity to go be an air traffic controller, and I did. it's really interesting to see the movement back and forth here. And I can tell you that at Alaska Airlines, there's at least 2 or 3 other folks I know that were former controllers that are now, line pilots, and it's a great combination of knowledge to have. Current hiring, the FAA Academy has been shut down as a result of sequestration since April and will be until at least the beginning of fiscal year 2014, which is October 1st. That means no new controllers in the pipeline. When do you anticipate there's going to be more hiring for controllers?
We've started executing the funds, leftover FY13 funds, to have the Academy up and running and ready to go in October. There's approximately 800 to 900 controllers that are qualified, already gone through the medical and security process, and will be put into that pipeline. How many we actually hire in FY14, that remains to be seen, depending upon sequestration, budget cuts, restrictions, and other guidance or hints from Congress. But the important thing for us right now, what we're working with both terminal and route, as well as the HR folks that do the hiring, is those critically staffed facilities, getting the balance just right. Doesn't do us any good to send 100 controllers to Oakland Center if they're not ready to train them, or if they can't handle that crunch of trainees. Or like we talked about, you might have a smaller facility and you've got 5 trainees deep waiting for that 1 hour of busy period per day. So right now, as we formulate our FY14 plan, the Academy will be up and running. We know that 3 years from now, we'll feel the cuts for the hiring that we did not do this year. We didn't take that lightly, but again, little balance in the checkbook issue there. And when we're asking all of our employees to take unpaid time off, it was difficult to justify continuing to hire new hires. Going forward to this year, I can assure you the FAA is making sure that no matter what, we have to hire controllers and technicians at our critically staffed facilities, and it has to be a well-coordinated plan to ensure that that facility can provide that training once those controllers get there. So I know probably at least 600 or so. I think we have the plan for the first 600. Going into FY, we'll have a little more fidelity right around October FY14 for the rest of the year.
Well, it's interesting to know too that when we went to the Academy, the FAA Academy is it's on the west side of the Oklahoma City airport. You've probably seen it if you've been taxiing by there. It looks sort of like a community college essentially, and it's an enormous facility. It's got medical, it's got all kinds of things there. But when we went through, the success rate at the Academy itself was probably half. It's 50-55%. I know we were talking earlier this morning about our individual classes and the complete lack of success thereof. But now the success rate at the Academy is up to 75%-ish.
In the en route program, it's at 74%, 75%, and then for those that are going through the terminal program, it's even higher. It's almost 95%.
Which is a huge improvement from past years, but still maybe not as high a success rate as folks might like to see. And then you look at that and you compare that with the success rate, because once they go through the Academy, then they go to their first facility. And there's no guarantee they're going to check out at the first facility, and the checkout rate at the first facility between en route, and when we say en route, we mean air traffic control centers like Miami Center. When we say terminal, we mean an approach or a tower. And the success rate there is about 80%, give or take a little bit. And so you do that math and you look on the en route, on the center side, that means you got to take in 2 people to get 1 line qualified controller. On the terminal side, you probably have to take in about 1.5 to get 1. And the other interesting part of this is that they won't be a line certified controller for, it takes about an average of 2.5 years to check out at your first terminal facility, and an average of about 3.5 years at your first en route facility. You add that to the 3 to 6 months at the Academy, and you're talking about a good 2.5 to 3 years for a terminal facility. You're talking about 3.5 to 4 years, 3 to 4 years at an en route facility. But from the time that person walked in the door at the Academy, I'm not even talking about when they started at Embry-Riddle or someplace else. I'm talking from the day they walked in and was hired by the FAA until they are a controller. And can you imagine what our airlines would do trying to make that plan work? Okay, I don't know if your new hire pilots are going to make it for 3.5 to 4 years, and probably between half and 3/4 of them will make it. How do you plan for that hiring? How do you plan for that staffing? And that's the nightmare that sort of FAA, I think, is facing now. Then you add on top of that then the cool part about sequestration, where the FAA Academy can be shut off involuntarily at any time. And this is something that could significantly affect us downstream. We won't feel it next month or the month after, but we'll feel it here in a few years when we see a lack of controllers in the pipeline. And that's going to be quite something to look at. Oh, and another thing too is you contrast that with the possibility, we're looking at huge retirements in the airline industry. Well, remember in 1981 when all the controllers were fired as a result of the PATCO issue, all the folks, that hiring binge that took place just after that, those folks are starting to retire in droves. And as they retire, is there anybody left to fill the void? I wanted to run through just a real quick, maybe just a couple of minutes each. If Bill, if you want to share just a couple of minutes on kind of when folks show up at a place like Embry-Riddle or UND or UAA, kind of, what's their typical road? What's their timeline? The graduation rate? Is there a lot of interaction and exposure to pilot programs? Just a minute or two on that.
Well, there are 36 schools currently today in the CTI program. Within the U.S., there's Alaska, and we have one in Puerto Rico. Of the 36 programs, we have 16 that offer associate degrees, which is basically a 2-year degree. We have 34 bachelor's degrees and then 2 master's degrees. I know the numbers don't add up, but that's because some of the schools, about 7, offer the opportunity for a bachelor's or an associate's degree. Embry-Riddle I can speak of because that's obviously where I'm from in Daytona Beach. Ours is a 4-year program. All of the students, when they enter training, in our agreement with the FAA, we're required to, in our curriculum, cover content areas of instruction, which referred to as the air traffic basics. There's 31 different lessons, and so we embed that and we create classes from that and curriculum. The students go through that. Some of the schools have simulation, some don't. It's not required. We have simulation. We cover all 3 areas: terminal, tower, and en route, both radar and non-radar. If it's a 4-year program, they'll go through the program. And we're there primarily to give them a 4-year bachelor's degree. So within that degree, obviously the air traffic corps is included. We have all the colleges have different forms of general education, and in our program we require some type of aviation-related minor. We've got about 500 in our program. It varies, 400 to 500, a little bit more. Nearly half of those are what we call, because we offer a minor, an air traffic minor, and about half of those are minors, and most of those are pilots. A lot of the pilots at Embry-Riddle use the air traffic minor, and it works great because we have that flow, that interaction between the student pilots that are up in the air every day and our air traffic students. And then as they progress through their degree, it's about 6 months to a year before they graduate. They're scheduled to take the ATSAT, the Air Traffic Selection and Training Tool. It's the aptitude test that the FAA gives. They will be scheduled by the FAA or the vendor, and they will take that. Basically, they have to have a 70. If they don't have a 70, they're not eligible to be hired. Once they complete that, they graduate. We look at their program, what they've done, and then all of the schools will recommend to the FAA that these students are eligible to be hired. They've completed the CTI portion, the agreement we have with the FAA, and so they are then eligible to be hired. At that point, it's, when has the hiring notice come out, and then they can apply for it. So there's the timeline to get a degree generally is 2 to 4 years, but from the point they graduate until they actually, their feet enters the door at the academy, can be anywhere from 6 months to 1.5 or 2 years. And then there's a whole process they go through with the, with the FAA and the temporary offer letters and the interviews and the background checks and the medical and so forth and so on. So it can be quite a a time frame after graduation and with sequestration. Like you said, we're not really feeling it right now, but it's going to hit us. And I don't know where it will end up.
Tom, do you want to share a little bit about once they leave the CTI program, their accepted into the FAA, they attend the academy in Oklahoma City, and just a minute or two on that, and then what they see when they get to their first facility as far as training.
Okay, so when you get to the academy, you already know your facility assignment. So if you're going through the terminal or the tower program, then you go through the tower simulator. That's a 7.5 to 8 week course, and they go through there, and you have the opportunity to work. Well, there's also a classroom. You have your initial ATC training. You go through the classroom. They have the old fly the airplanes around still, the cab lab where they go around and fly that around. And then they move into
You think he's kidding. It's literally a table with an airport painted on top of it and little dudes walking around the room holding an airplane doing what the guy in the little stand is telling them to do.
Correct.
And I keep thinking I thought it was goofy 25 years ago, and I'm so happy to hear that technology has not overcome us.
They do step up to a really high fidelity simulator though after that. They go to the TSS, which is the tower simulator, is amazing. It's a really good mock-up of Academy Airport, and they have the opportunity to work on ground control, clearance delivery, and flight data, and practice in that type of environment. And then at the end, they're given a performance evaluation, and if they're successful, they go on to the facility and they start OJT. En route is basically, they've changed that a little bit in the last 18 months. We are now objective grading. You go in, you do the same initial course, then you go into doing some simulation, tabletop simulation, and then they put you in the high fidelity ERAM simulator, and you'll spend about 8 weeks in there, 8 to 9 weeks in there, and go through and basically work on the Aero Center mock-up that they have at the academy, and practice that and go through they have 4 different objective grading problems that you should take, and you have to pass those, and once those are completed, you report to an en route facility and start OJT there. And as you discussed, the process like in an en route facility is anywhere from 3 to 3.5 years for certification.
And when they get to their facility, it's a combination of, sometimes there are simulators, and I can tell you the simulators are amazing. They're really high fidelity. It represents a huge change, because it used to be that it was the equivalent of 30, 40 years ago in the airlines where all the training was done in the airplane at night at 2 a.m. in Cheyenne or something. It was always done at the facility, and it was live traffic, and what that means is if Tim is training me, that means I'm plugged in, and Tim is plugged in with me, and he has an override so that if necessary, he can shut me up if the whack on the shoulder doesn't work. And what they do is they let the person go as long as they can, and then when they either need to step in, or I can remember one time when I was training, and I was sort of like the fingernails over the edge of the toilet thing, and my trainer just said, "Hey, Mark, I got to talk for just a minute here," and he talked for a minute or so, kind of cleaned it up a little bit, and said, "Okay, it's yours again." And that's how you get trained, because you have to be exposed to live traffic. You have to understand what's going on. You got to get over your stage fright. You got to get the picture. You got to keep the picture. And when the picture changes, you got to change with it. So there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, but there's a lot of simulation they can do at the facilities now. Same thing at the colleges. I remember I was at UAA last year, and I was watching a girl being trained on local, on the tower position, and I'm looking at her, and I asked somebody, how many hours does she have? And she's been on the simulator for about 20 hours. And from my perspective, she was just about ready for checkout. And it was amazing, because the instructor had a list of things this long, of things she had needed to improve on. And it was like, wow, that's quite, so the training itself has changed and improved by quite a bit. With that, I think we've tried to cover the material that we've kind of came here today to cover. We'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. If you have any questions for our panelists here, anything you'd like to know, questions, concerns, issues. John.
Hello, Mark. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. This is John Drexler. He is our NATCA liaison for the Airline Pilots Association, and a pilot with Nice.
I bring my own group with me when I go. My own group is
Gotta love roadies. And John's company seems to change every day. Monday it was United Continental Holdings. Tuesday it was United Continental Airlines. Wednesday I think it was just Continental because he got tired of the United part. So please, John.
Gentlemen, the question I have for you is this. On July 1st, the NTSB issued a safety recommendation letter to the FAA regarding go-arounds at airports with intersecting runways. The question would be, one, how does the FAA respond to this? And two, how do the affected facilities respond? Thank you.
If it's all right with you, Mark, I'll take the initial answer to that question. Prior to the NTSB issuing that recommendation, I was the Director of Safety and as the one in charge of investigations and actually participating in some of the investigations of the events that led to this. We had identified this issue internally. Steve Hansen, the NACA Safety Chair, and myself had had many conversations after we had gone to the same events that the NTSB had. And the one clarification I want to make is that the recommendation is regarding non-intersecting runways. The runways actually don't intersect. The pavement ends or somebody painted the pavement green so it's magically not there. And
nice.
But they're intersecting flight paths, either right at the approach end or right at the departure end, depending on the scenario. And up until now, we have not identified that as up until now there has not been a rule in place that governed that. So absent that rule, in the name of efficiency and controllers doing the best they can to keep the airplanes moving, have run those types of operations independently. So a place where we've had at least 3 events that are almost identical at Las Vegas, a late go around on runway 25 left with a 19 left departure, that they were each cleared to land and cleared for takeoff independently by 2 different local controllers. Last minute go around and the aircraft come together. Well, we had some significant events and we were aware of those. And what we found was the rules that were being applied was tower visual, which we have differing opinions on tower visual, but a lot of times you're just a witness to what's occurring.
Yeah. Difference between tower witness and tower visual
yeah.
separation.
And then there's a quick exchange of traffic. The controllers are doing everything they can from a stationary position and issuing traffic to these pilots who, again, if they don't understand the workload in the cockpit at that critical phase of flight, they're hoping those pilots report each other in sight and then instruct them to maintain visual, which makes everything better now because both pilots or both air crews know what the others are doing, allegedly. Again, because of the critical phase of flight, it doesn't always go as the controller planned. One of our FY12 top 5 issues was go-arounds. And the issue had to do with controllers being prepared to issue immediate deconflicting instructions for go-arounds. That worked. We went out and trained it. Controllers helped develop it collaboratively at every facility, and the instructions are perfect. There was an event, I can't recall if it's in the NTSB report, it's in our report that we issued in December of last year at Charlotte, where the controllers performed flawlessly. There was an RJ bouncing on 2-3. Another local controller had cleared a departure for takeoff off of 18 center. The coordination was incredible. Last minute go around, the local controller issued a turn to pass behind the 18 center without delay, issued a perfect turn instructions. The other local controller issued traffic on the departure. However, that RJ was in no position to turn yet, just flew straight out, and we had an overfly situation. So while we addressed not having comprehensive go-around, unplanned go-around instructions around the country, we actually didn't address that possibility of a near-midair collision at the midfield or at the end of the airport. So with that, we had actually issued a quality assurance corrective action request in December of 2012. And we looked at 7 airports around the country, Boston, Houston, Charlotte, Chicago, Las Vegas, and Kennedy. And we did not have ASDI data at the time for Las Vegas, so it was a limited review of Las Vegas. And we're using PDAR's equipment, which you may be familiar with, but we found 40 of those similar events, where originally it was, hey, that only happens 1 in a million times. Then it was, well, it happens a couple times a year, and now we're finding out that just looking at 7 airports, we actually had 40 events. The important thing being is that controllers didn't know to report it. Unless an aircrew complained to the NTSB or the facility had a really close call that somebody decided to log it, it was unknown because it wasn't a loss of separation. There wasn't a rule about it. So it's probably happening closer to 100 times a year, but it's successfully mitigated by the air crews and by the controllers using visual separation. Obviously, that's not an acceptable position to be in given the level of risk. So right now we're analyzing the data. The first thing that we've done at Vegas is they've stopped running those operations independently, and they do run them dependently. We have several technologies that can be used, and what we want to do is we want to mitigate it either procedurally or through technology. Procedurally is they become dependent operations. Just pretend that pavement connects, and we have rules that say it's a stagger operation. Okay? The technology solution is kind of a two-step process. There are things called an arrival-departure window, which when an aircraft is within anywhere from a half mile to a 3 mile final, it depends on the different modeling of the different airport geometry, don't clear that aircraft for takeoff. The incident that the NTSB makes reference to at Kennedy, where an American pilot says, hey, I'm trying not to hit this guy off my right now, as he went around off of 22 left, and there was a 13 right departure. That was the one instance since they implemented an ADW at Kennedy that the controller did not comply with it. We looked at hundreds of hours of data for Kennedy, and they had used that ADW flawlessly. The one time that they didn't use it in over a year, that aircraft actually ended up going around, and it was immediate confliction with the previous departure, or the departure off of the 13s. So we know the technology works. We know, given the numbers that they run at Kennedy, that it really doesn't adversely impact the operation. There is some impact. You do give pause to make sure that arrival is either touching down or in that window, but it becomes a timing issue, just getting that rhythm down. As we go to introduce that around the country, obviously there's going to be some resistance to change by everybody, and there's certainly a lot of concern about efficiency. So we're just bringing a work group together. I believe they're going to meet sometime in August 13, 14 is when they'll sit down and they'll actually proceduralize how we're going to do that. In the meantime, terminal operations has directed their towers to not run those operations independently anymore. Give consideration to where that arrival is, and then what we have to do on the safety side of the house is come in with that technology and offer a study. Is it going to be ADW? Is it going to be the tool we use at Boston for converging runway displayed, CRDA, where there's ghosting on final, and if both aircraft perhaps go missed, that we don't have a close call at the runway intersection. So CRDA, enhanced ASDI, is the last one, which would take an ADW and turn it into a dynamic ADW. Right now it's kind of an inefficient block. It takes into a lot of consideration the different types of aircraft. If we can use the ASDI radar, which is at our 35 or 36 busiest airports, if it's dynamically built into actual aircraft characteristics and tells the controller when they can launch it and it's being figured out logically, we know we'll optimize our efficiency, and we're hoping that we'll have that by the end of FY14.
So the Air Traffic Services Group was briefed on this by the National Transportation Safety Board earlier this week, and we've interacted with them, and then we have subsequently briefed both the Training Council and the Safety Council on these activities to give them a heads up of what's going on, make sure they're aware, make sure they can pass that information on to their folks at their airlines.
Thanks, Tim. Very comprehensive answer. It didn't sound like you were prepared for the question. Marc, at LaGuardia, we always use square your base to find it.
There you go.
Thank you.
Please.
Does ALPA and NACA work together, or should work together, on possibly taking ADSAPs and ASAPs and sit down together and look at potential problems within the NAS on pilot and controller issues? Is there like a event review board or anything of that nature?
Yeah, we do have that.
Yeah, that's the confidential information sharing program that we talked about that takes ASAP reports and ADSAP reports and compares them and then moves forward on mitigations, risk identification, and then brings those concepts to the facilities to kind of keep those things from happening. So yeah, that's already in place, and that is a fairly new process, like months old at some places.
It's like 13 airlines in it, right?
Yeah,
and the amount of information you get from seeing both sides is
And I think we've processed at least 10,000 reports. Is it 10,000 reports we've compared, or
I don't know what the comparison number is.
It's over 1,000.
And it's going to get a lot bigger because as more and more airlines become a part of that. So thank you. Bill?
Hi, my name is Bill DeGrow. I'm an Eagle pilot. I'm also the Aircraft Design and Operations Group Chair. Just a quick question, I think, for Dale and Tom. Flying out of Dallas-Fort Worth, Glen Rose 9, told to comply with the speeds, 280 250 and 11, then I shortly check in with approach and they say, delete the speeds. So can you perhaps talk to what's going on behind the scenes, because we view it sometimes as a little bit of an impact in our fuel, and whether it could be a little bit better communication between center and approach. Thank you.
Well, what may be happening is when you're coming in, there's space that they want to get you up. You know, there's say not arrivals from the other way, and they're trying to get you to the front of the line. So to keep the efficiency going, they try to speed you up. They don't need the 250.
And I think usually the issue you get from the en route to the terminal environment is usually going to be something to do with a letter of agreement requirement that we're required to deliver the aircraft at a certain speed over the arrival fix. So you're getting that transition, the request from one to the other, and then they're, okay, delete the speed restriction, go fast, speed up, because he's trying to decrease the space inside the terminal environment.
Ben?
Yeah,
This will be I think this will end up being our last question, I think. But Ben, please.
Ben Stratton with the ATS Group, Compass Pilot as well. What's the ATO doing to prep for sequestration 2.0, and what can pilots do to help?
Well, it depends right now. We have the President's budget, we have the House markup, right? You've got the Senate, and then you've got sequestration, which is a 10-year plan. Don't know how much of a plan it actually is, but it's a 10-year plan.
More of an idea, suggestion.
Right. So which one do we act upon? And the truth is at the executive level, we're doing budget contingencies for whatever the plan may be. Last year, Congress interceded and provided additional funding to the FAA. We certainly can't lobby for that. Others might be able to. But given the size of the cuts that we have to take, and not unlike any other people industry, our people are our most valuable resource, but they're also the largest part of our cost, right? Salaries and benefits. So only about 20% of our budget is discretionary. We've got to take a large amount of cuts, and we have a budget plan we're developing a budget plan for each scenario that may unfold, but we're still awaiting some guidance and identifying where we can cut. You may have heard last year we identified certain things that we were going to cut. It felt odd as a safety organization to actually consider closing control towers, but you have to make some decisions, no different than an airline or a fire, a town trying to figure out how to close a fire station or two, or a police department. So that being said, we have that unique challenge of being told to cut our budget significantly, and then having the user community as well as our legislature comment that we're not cutting appropriately. So it's a bit of a guessing game. It's a bit of a political challenge, and ultimately it's going to play out, I think, in the press and on the Hill. So as pilots, where you have valid safety concerns, I would recommend that you share those concerns, and we'll make sure we provide as much transparency along the way as we can with the resources that we have.
The sequestration affects, it's obviously all of us. We're involved in a lot of projects. We sit at a lot of tables, and it's a little unnerving to see things change. We've got AWAPA. We've been heavily involved in airspace projects, and that came to a grinding halt on April 1st, and it's sort of semi-starting back up. October 1st, we sort of halfway expect it to sort of take a back seat again, possibly. And so we have to be prepared for all these eventualities and remain engaged. So I think that is the allotment of time. I want to thank everybody for your time and attention, and I want to thank our panelists for spending some time with us this morning. Thank you, appreciate it.